Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart with Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we're going to talk about diet culture. Yes, the toxic aspects of it. There are benefits to it, but I think we've now come to conclusions that probably the toxicity of becoming too married to a different diet culture could actually impair you from achieving your goals. And today's expert who is joining us is Molly Carmel, LCSW-R. She'll tell you what that means. She is a leading addictions and eating disorder therapist and founder of the Beacon program, which offers individual and group solutions to help people break free from their destructive relationships with food and dieting. After battling an eating disorder for over 20 years and finding no solution and available treatment, she began her professional path and has never looked back. In addition to her extensive training in substance abuse and eating disorders, Molly is intensively trained in an undying love for dialectical behavior therapy. We're going to dive into that as well.
Yay.
She's also a trained shaman, Reiki healer, and certified Tibetan bowl singing practitioner. Known for her irreverent, straight talk, no chaser attitude. She's also the author of the innovative book, Breaking Up with Sugar, a plan to divorce the diets, drop the pounds, and live your best life. And the host of the podcast, What You're Craving. Molly's work has been featured on The Today Show, The Dr. Oz Show, Dateline NBC, Anderson Cooper 360, and Extreme Makeover, as well as in People Magazine and the Los Angeles Times. She's also featured on Ever Forward Radio and the Skinny Confidential podcast, and she's broken from her busy schedule. Welcome, Molly, to the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. And I need to get you on my podcast. Let's make that another date for another time. But wow, so good to be here. So good to see you. Thanks for having me, Wade.
Okay, so we're going to go to the 2 easy questions first, or maybe they're hard. What is where we got it? Dialectical behavior therapy and the LCSW-R. What are those 2 things?
The LCSW-R just means that I am an old lady. Okay. And I've had the same job for like 23 years.
Right.
So that just means I'm at the end stages of how qualified you can be to be a social worker, which I actually do think is relevant in what I'm talking about, because I've had the same job since I'm 22 years old.
You know, it's very interesting. My former bodybuilding coach, Scott Abel, also was a social worker. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, he wrote a great book, The Other Side of the Mirror, exposing the diet cults inside of the fitness industry, particularly around the bodybuilding and fitness community, and how many women particularly fell victim to some severely metabolically damaging ideas, which were propagated by the bodybuilding community and went step down into young females, which is even more disruptive than it is for young males.
Wow.
And he was able to kind of identify some of the, I would say, defective thought processes because of how we form social relationships, and his experience in social determined how we make these aspects. But the bottom line is this: 96% of the people who start a diet are going to end up a failure. So that tells me that the entire industry is essentially propped up on a set of foundational lies. because
I'd take it a step further.
So
Look,
get
I
into
would
it.
take it. I think that's like the nicest thing you could say about diet culture.
That's awesome.
Because the research that I'm actually, well, I mean, who knows when the book will come out, but this is the little baby I have sitting inside of me right now. I'm doing some research on it. And if you parallel an abusive relationship and somebody trapped in the cycle of diet culture, you'll be, well, you and I won't be that shocked, but one would be incredibly shocked at the similarities. And the only thing that makes the relationship with diet culture, I'm not here to compare pain. Please don't hear that. But in one, we're talking about a person, that you're in an abusive relationship with a person. The other one, we're talking about that you're in an abusive relationship with $1 billion marketing mechanism, right? That is that loses money when you leave its cycle, right? There's all that research about Weight Watchers from years and years and years ago about how they try to keep you in their cycle.
But we got another emerging problem. Came out from the White House the other day, which is saying that all causes of obesity are genetic and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's part of. Well,
as someone who used to weigh 325 pounds, I would say that's untrue.
Yeah, exactly. So that's
I'll start there. Point. I'll start on my own personal journey.
Right, but again, now we're seeing another culture. So we're in this interesting thing where we have these two cults. The diet cult, and then the drug cult, which is the pharmaceutical industrial complex. And they're literally, it's like going back and forth between two different abusive relationships. But let's back the truck up to your statement in that, how does one get caught inside of an abusive dietary relationship in the first point? What hooks us into that? What attracts us into us? What keeps us into us? What keeps us into this kind of cycle? And maybe that has something to do with the dialectical behavior therapy that.
Yeah, gosh, this is the best conversation I've ever had. I'm like opening my computer, I'm like getting notes out. Listen, I mean, it's a really interesting idea. What I want to say is that, like, when I usually think of this, like when I think about, well, what's the real thing that gets us hooked? I would say personally, it's weight. It's our obsession with scale and number and body. I think if you took that out of the equation, we wouldn't have so much of a problem, because the two ideas in behaviorism and in psychology that I think about when I think about abuse and I think about abusive relationships, and certainly I think about this particular abusive relationship, is the idea of intermittent reinforcement and the idea of learned helplessness. So intermittent reinforcement, so we have like a constant reinforcement, like, you know, I can't think of a good example of constant reinforcement, but it's like you get a known reinforcer every time you do something, right? So, and intermittent reinforcement is you get a reinforcer sometimes when you do something, right? And in many ways, it's how abusers make people go crazy, right? They abuse you, and one time they're just so nice and they bring you flowers, right? Right. And so it's like that with dieting, right? Like we fail at a diet, but every now and then there's that one diet that actually works. And then we kind of get hooked into that. And then we buy all those things, but then it lets us down, but we have that memory of how good it felt. And so, and by the way, like in prison, this is how you can make somebody go crazy. You put somebody in solitary confinement, you feed them stale bread and water, and then one day you bring them a piece of cake. And then they're always just waiting for that piece of cake. And that's what happens in abusive relationships with people. Oh, but there was that one time he bought me flowers, right? And then that's what happens in diet culture. If we rewind just for 1 second, I mean, the cultural this thing is in so many, and this thing is in my DNA and my mother's DNA and my mother's DNA. I mean, I think there is a cultural, and I think it has a lot to, I think it has a lot, I think from a cis woman perspective, I think it has a lot to do with patriarchy, lots to do with like keeping women down, another podcast for another day. But I know in my own personal experience, they were worried about my weight. I was rewarded when I was thinner. I weighed, as I said before, I weighed 325 pounds, how I was treated. So if you think about reinforcement, just as an idea, the reinforcement I had when I was thin or when I am thin is so incredibly different than the negative reinforcement I had when I was morbidly obese, right? But so that's what intermittent reinforcement is. And so it's like we keep on going back into the game with the hopes that maybe we'll get that 30-pound weight loss that we had on that one conventional diet program and so on and so forth, right? But after a while, intermittent reinforcement, it dwindles, right? It dwindles and it turns into this thing called learned helplessness.
Right.
There's some really, if you're feeling like, wow, I want to read some really pathetically sad data.
That sounds inspiring.
If you're really listener, if you're in the mood for some really like, what's the saddest data? Go read the data, because the main data on learned helplessness is that you keep on shocking a dog and the dog no longer feels the shock. So you keep on abusing an animal, and an animal is no longer. This
is desensitization, which
just lays there dead.
It's happened cross culturally now with the pervasiveness of the internet or the invasiveness of the internet to expose people to increasing levels of shock until you've been desensitized, sexuality, all of these things would fit along the same line. So what is common, like, I'll give you an example.
God, Wade, we're like really on board with learned helplessness together, huh?
Well, we'll take it. Let's go back to the time machine to when, if you recall, when Madonna came out with her Like a Prayer video.
What a great video.
Okay. But that was considered
scandalous.
Today, that video would not bat an eyebrow.
Oh, yeah, it's right. So true. Yep. When Brenda and Dylan slept together on Beverly Hills 90210, it was it was like,
right. So when Elvis came on the television and he was shaking around and everything, they started showing him from the top down, top up. They wouldn't show his legs. And so now you can get just the most egregious violence, pornography, whatever, downloaded onto your phone for your 10-year-old, for example, can have access to this. Okay. So we have pushed the needle really far because we don't live in an information age. We live in an attention age.
That's right.
And to get more and more attention, you need to get more and more shocking. But I want to tie this back about attention.
Right. So this idea of learned helplessness is that you are basically taught by diet culture that you can't be helped. You run out of intermittent reinforcement. In the beginning of diet culture, you thrive on intermittent reinforcement. You're waiting for that reinforcer. You're waiting for that scale to go down. You're getting big rewards. You're like, yes. And you can sort of deal with the idea that maybe you didn't lose this weight or you'll flip to another diet because that's going to get you more of a high, right? The other thing I want to say is we could never prove this scientifically, but if you take the top two criteria of addiction, which is needing more to get the same high and withdrawal, you could link those on diet culture so fast, right? So if you said to someone, let's just eat healthfully, let's eat a really balanced meal and that'll help you lose 0.5 pound to a pound a week. I don't know about you in your practice, but if they could slit my throat through a Zoom, they sure would, right? Because it's not big enough, right? I need more to get the same high, right? And if you say to someone, why don't you not worry about the food for a second and let's work on something else? Again, they're like, no. And I think there's a lot to this, right? We have addiction, we have abuse. I mean, we are using like enormous words here. So after time, people are so desensitized to these harmful means in which they are deciding to try to adjust their weight and their looks, that they become rendered completely hopeless. And I think part of that hopelessness leads people into what we were talking about before we started, into this toxic tribalism, because I actually think on the other side of diet culture is actually this health at any size movement, which I think comes with a lot of positives. Just having been in a morbidly obese body for a very long time, in a very different time where I couldn't buy underwear, I have one store to go to. I mean, the kind of, I was on the beach this summer, just in awe of people's comfort with their bodies and, the size differences and size inclusivity. I think it's wonderful. But there's a part of that particular movement, which is the toxic piece, that shuns weight loss, shuns wanting to lose weight, shuns wanting any sort of improvement
essentially becomes a counterculture to health.
I think it's a trauma response. So I do.
Right.
As a therapist.
That's very interesting. So I'll give you another example, because when did these things start impacting you as a person? Say
7.
Wow.
Well, 7's when my mother took me to a nutritionist.
That's interesting, because typically, if we look at where I see a lot of challenges, particularly around females, is when they start going through puberty.
Yeah, 13. I'd say a lot. I think my family got worried about me at 7, so that was where it became. And then I went to a nutritionist, and then it was like I was already weighing 4 ounces of turkey by the age of 7. So that's when my diet culture stuff started.
Right. And so for women, particularly, as they mature faster than men, and they become, they develop powers based on their sexuality. And then, of course, today, instead of maybe comparison with a peer group of 20, 30, 40, 50 girls that might have been in a small town, now you're comparing against millions of people on the internet. So of course, the amygdala center says, I'm low on the tribal value system. I've got to clamor for this. So I would love to know the kind of like the amygdala response and maybe neurochemical tendencies, who's more predisposed to addictive behavior that could get caught in this type of loop.
Well, there's also this is old data, so please excuse it, but there's like a 10% inheritance rate of eating disorders, right? So, you're a bulimic mom, you have a 10% chance of handing that and schizophrenia too, and anorexia. So I think that's a part of it, but I have to say, I'm in my long list of things I'm trained in, I'm trained in breath work, and a young girl is 5 years old when she starts bracing her belly, when she stops breathing correctly. That's kindergarten.
Wow.
So I think it's
that because of the education system, or
I think it's the education because it's nervousness, but I also think it's culture. I have 5 godkids, and they range in age from 6 to 13, and I don't know, 7 and 8, they started talking about my body because my body looks different than their mom's bodies. I have a lot of stretch marks on them. Yep. Different, I proudly, they're tribal scars, but, I think they all started noticing, very early, very conscious about what they're wearing, what they look like. I think it probably is earlier than a menses, but the menses is at 11.
Well, I think in the development of behavioral psychology, I think if you have a 6-year-old and you tell them to draw a picture of what you see, they draw what they see. But when they become a 7-year-old, they will attempt to draw what they think you might see.
Right.
And so there starts to be the idea of, I'm not completely narcissistic in my kind of viewpoint. I'm able to expand. And part of the socialization of play is to learn how to navigate my desires and my wants with my playmates and how they want, and then negotiating out that part. And then what happens is we start the forms of tribes and cliques and hierarchies, and the in girls and the out and the cool guys and the outcasts. And then part of the response is for outcasts to band together. in order to create a counterculture, which would be similar to what you're describing here with the kind of counter health culture to the
That's
trauma of rejection because of their physicality. Would that make sense?
It makes all the sense in the world to me. It makes all the sense in the world. I think that the main problem I have with that movement is the rejection of people who want to maybe be a size 12, a size 12 or 14 and not a size 24. And they would want to change their bodies to be a different size. And they're completely rejected by that movement. It's really a shame.
Let's talk about that for a second, because I think if we're going to get into tribal dynamics, I think we've got to go back in time as to why behaviors like this kind of emerged in human civilization. What do you think was the advantages or disadvantages by creating a set of evaluation tools of where you ranked in a tribal kind of situation?
I think it's always like that Maslow idea, right, of safety. I think about this slogan they have in the 12 steps, right? Where they say, always stay in the middle of the pack. They talk about the zebras and how the zebras on the outside of the pack are the ones that get picked off. And so, I think it's safe. I think everything mostly is about safety and security. And I think having a common enemy will always make people feel safe, and it will always bring people together.
Correct. I would say that's a very female-centric view, because from a masculine standpoint, they're often celebrated by the ones who take the risk, or the front guy going in there risking their lives. So there's a risk-taking behavior that I think is traditionally rewarded in masculine-based culture, because they were the guys that stopped the bad guys from coming over the wall. And your sense of respect inside of tribalism was your way. You essentially are a dominant, disagreeable person because you're the guy that's got the cojones to fight off whoever's coming over that wall to kill your family or your tribe. And so men are ranked in order of, the alphas and the betas being the supportive, and of course the swashbuckling leader that runs into the burning building or comes over the wall or jumps out. And there's a hierarchy based on that side of things. And then from the safety secure side would be a different, so
I think the reason people form cliques and tribes is a function of wanting to have inclusion and safety.
Right.
I think why people leave tribes and maybe talk a bit more in this alpha space that you're talking about is to create a new tribe. I still think it's a function of safety. I think even when an alpha decides, I'm going to leave this tribe, it's in a function of trying to shift a dynamic or do something different or rebel against what it is and create a new tribe. I don't know that any of them do that in the spirit of wanting to be alone.
Yeah, well, I'm just kind of working through this.
They want them people banding. They want to be.
I was looking at how does one become recognized as a valued member of the tribe?
Right.
And then, so for example, if you are a coward, in other words, you turn away from the fight amongst your masculine friends, and I'm just talking from that culture.
Yeah.
You're branded as weak, as not trustable, as someone that's not in the inner circle. How does this shape inside maybe female-centric views of safety? So safety and security means I'm with the tough guys. I'm going to get in there and throw haymakers with everybody else. And this happens, particularly, you see it playing out a lot at colleges, where a group of men start to just become outrageous behavior to kind of one-up each other inside of a kind of a whole culture. And there's a positive aspect of it, and then it kind of tips into the negative aspect of it, that it flips over. How do you see that on the female side of things?
Well, you're talking though about a fraternal. I mean, I always think about that. That's sort of that alpha, bro culture in a way. because I think you see the same thing with women. I don't think it's.
That's what I'm trying to. I'm just.
Yeah, I don't know that it's like
the female
that. It's like cookie parties all day. It can get pretty fierce, and women can get pretty cutthroat too. I think it's sort of our problem societally right now is that competition and scarcity has really stolen community and connection, right? There's not enough.
Attack each other through physicality, and women will do through character assassination.
We're speaking
right.
We're speaking in like very general terms, right? I mean,
this is typically how, say, people position themselves in the hierarchy. And why I'm trying to establish that is because when people are not part of this perceived cultural outcome, or they're not a high-ranking member in that. So that could be your weight, that could be your income, that could be your beauty, that could be all of these things. And then it leads to the learned helplessness because there's nothing I can do to kind of move up that ranking, or I find another tribe that I might be able to move into a better position into. I'm just trying to understand with you because I can't have a conversation about this. I'm trying to establish what draws us into the idea that we've got to fit into a culture, or we got to counter a culture in the first.
But I think that I think the desire to look a certain way, which I do think is a function of patriarchy largely. I mean, my friend Natalia Petrozelli wrote an amazing book called Fit Nation that talks a ton about this. And it's a very recent book. It's about the history of gyms, frankly. And, they were telling women the diets for women in the 1940s was like vodka, broccoli, and, maybe a piece of cheese or something, right? So we've been telling women to starve themselves and look good and wear and wear Spanx and all, I mean, forever, right? We've had this idea, this impossible ideal. I mean, and this also comes along with women being culture, making women incredibly scared of aging and menopause, and women trying to hop the men. I mean, this thing is deep and big and bigger than all of us put together because it runs it runs back into like, I don't even know. I have no idea where it started, to be honest. I do know this one study about a Polynesian island that had no televisions, no magazines, and no eating disorders. And then they got televisions and magazines and had lots of eating disorders. So I also recall from a million years ago in the movie Fed Up. Remember that movie where he eats McDonald's for 31 days and he almost dies?
Yeah.
But there's this great piece of data in that movie, which is you can sit with your child at breakfast and for 25 minutes, just sit and tell your child all the things about healthy food. Just sitting, amazing. You could even have characters. And by the time they get to school, they've seen more marketing for fast food and for highly processed food that you can't even, it's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. So I think there's a part of this where we can look at it anthropologically, but looking at it anthropologically doesn't take into account this billion-dollar industry that's running money out of it. Like I get this idea of it, tribalism, I think but tribalism plus like market research, it's so deep. This thing goes so deep, diet culture.
Well, yeah. I mean, essentially, you have competing tribes. You have the pharmaceutical industrial complex tribe. You have the agriculture industrial production tribe. Then you have the dietary tribe. And so essentially.
But I think you also have an incredibly vulnerable person who actually believes that if they hit a certain number on a scale, their life will be all better. And so they're willing to not access any part of their actual like human mind. They're just sitting in their reptile mind. And they'll be there like, I don't know what you've seen. When people are like, oh yeah, well, I was trying the caffeine diet. And I'm like, wait, is that really, is that a thing? What, can you talk me through what happened that had you, and even there's part, I've been a harm reduction, food addiction person for a long time. And even some of the ways people handle themselves with that particular way of eating is so unkind and just so, it's just
I don't
toxic.
remember the Devil Wears Prada.
Yes, I do.
And she goes, I'm on a new diet that I just eat nothing until I'm almost ready to faint. And then I eat a 1-inch cube of cheese or whatever. It was kind of exposing the ridiculousness, I think, in a really succinct way.
But, turn that into, to add a little bit of a obsessive compulsive mind.
Right.
And, and some other vulnerability factors, you get a really gnarly case of anorexia, which we still don't have an evidence base for. I mean.
Right. So just one question, because you brought this up and I want to unflesh it. Before we go any further and get deeper into the tribal aspect and how we avoid getting caught into it, I'd like for you to expand upon your perception of the patriarchal influence, because this is a hot topic that's being debated right now. And there's this idea of the patriarchy, and then this is oppressing women, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to understand.
It's a debate.
Yes, it is. It is a debate.
Fascinating.
Well, it's a debate because you could say, I want to hear what you say first on the patriarchy. And then I want to ask some counter questions so that I understand your perception, because I don't want to misidentify what that might be.
In a general way, I do a lot, I work with thousands and thousands and thousands of people. I'd say largely women. I'd say like 97% women.
Are women more likely to be susceptible to eating disorders?
I'm not sure. I'm not okay to say yes to that. I think women are more prone to treating their eating disorders. Because I have to say, I've had the privilege of treating a lot of men with eating disorders, and the stigma that they have coming to see me is significant. It's significant. I think it's kind of like a women's disease, and it is not just hit women, right?
So you think it's 50-50?
I think it's 100-100.
Like, what do you
kind
mean?
of. Yeah. I mean, I think the longer we do this and the more profound all of those three tribes you were talking about become immersed in our culture, because now I think there's this whole like orthorexia pretending like it's health, and you see a lot of men in that. So yeah, I think we think bulimia is just throwing up our food when we forget it's compensatory behavior. So we see a lot of men doing 2-a-days and 3-a-days and starving themselves and binging their food later. So I think if you really wanted to lean in from a diagnostic perspective, you would be able to flag a lot more eating disorders, and then disordered eating, forget it.
Is that another byproduct of the patriarchy on the man side, because they have to show up a certain way?
I think so.
Okay,
I think there's a lot of expectations.
So let's break that down so we understand the influence from your perspective on that. How does the patriarchy influence the
we're talking about the patriarchy, right? We're talking about the idea that like women didn't get, I mean, I don't have dates on this, right? But like women couldn't have a credit card till the 70s, right? Like women didn't have the right to vote for, like women, there is truth to say that women have not had the same rights as men in this particular country that we're sitting in, and in many countries, much less, for a really, really long time.
Women
and the suffrage.
I'll let it go, but women didn't go to war either.
Totally.
So it was also established that men have to go out and get slain. Men take the most violent jobs. Men are the most likely to be exposed to violence.
Well, I'm not saying it's good or it's bad.
No, I'm just trying to create a counterpoint, because I think if it's only lopsided on one side of victimhood, I don't think it does due diligence, considering you've just confirmed that there is distribution of eating disorders on both sides of the equation. So labeling it as the patriarchy is masculinization of a symptom that's happening cross gender, not.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point.
I just want to put that up there, because I don't think it's helpful to blame all of our problems on men or all of our problems on women. I think we need to blame our problems in how we intersect with civilization at the moment. What were the things that we could improve on? What are the things that we can let go of? And then how are these things toxically infecting us that's preventing us
Totally.
to get the outcome.
I'm not even sure I would use the word patriarchy. I would actually, and I think even in dialectical behavioral therapy, it would be, because that's such an inflammatory word. I think that my teacher would say, you know, what do you mean by patriarchy? So yeah,
Well,
I mean,
I establish that because there's a lot of murkiness around that.
Well, I think as you were saying that, I was sort of like, have we decided on a working definition of patriarchy? Probably not, which would mean that I would rather maybe not use it in general, because it is an inflammatory word. I'm maybe not going to be able to get the point across as to why we're suffering so much. But I do think there was and I think you're completely right with expectations of men. And by the way, the data on white men right now is absolutely frightening. And there are many researchers doing incredible work. This man named Scott Galloway, who this is his main line in concern. And I would encourage every single person to listen to his podcast right now with Dax Shepard. It is frightening, and it is important that we pay attention to everybody. There's so many people suffering right now as we're pertaining to like, how did this $1 billion diet culture get started? I think it was targeted more at women, although the men were in the gyms first, right? The men really were in the gyms first, which is accurate to your point.
Well, some people would say that women are traditionally framed as sex objects from their ability to procreate, and men are success objects. In other words, their ability to produce is what's celebrated, which is showing up in dating apps, for example. Like men are selecting 50% of the people on a swiping dating app, and women are selecting 4%.
1%, right? Exactly.
Right. So that's
by the way, that's the great concern right now with the white man, right? Because women are going to college more often. It's actually messing with. I mean, that's like the most, I am personally fascinated by that, you know, and I love like the book Raising Cain. If anybody wants to read great books, Raising Cain, Reviving Ophelia, wonderful books to read on the back end of what we're talking about here. But as it pertains to like, we're talking about like, there is an expectation.
We're way down the road. I'm having so much fun.
There is an expectation. When I have sat, I'm going to talk anecdotally.
Sure.
When I've sat with thousands and thousands and thousands of women, and we've started to do more of the therapy work of this, right? Where did this come from?
Yeah.
I watch them talk about watching their mothers starve themselves, watching their mothers get on the scale, watching their moms throw up, watching their moms not feel it. And where did those moms learn it? From the moms before them. And this, like, you need to get married to this person. And it's a lot of expectation, and it's a lot of fear, and it's ingrained. I mean, I really do think there is some like a generational trauma that exists. And listen, I'm just a cis woman. Like, I have not really, but I have to say, when I have treated eating disordered men, I say they learned a lot of it from their moms too, at least in my experience.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, you know what Freud said? Food is mommy, money is daddy. So that's a fun fact for us all to sit with right now.
It's a good one, right?
Well, does say a lot. Yeah. So I think it's just something that there's this generational belief and this a generational ideal and somewhere in the ether of belief. And listen, I got to tell you, I subscribe to it when I'm not in wisdom. Like I'll look at myself and I'll say, I wish this looked different. I wish that, that's why
I was like, where is this tribalistic valuation comes in that ultimately leads to the conversation that I have with myself.
Right. Well, right? I have to be honest, like, given how educated I am, given I do this every day, given honestly how much body acceptance I have, that's what always gets me, Wade. Like, I'm like, wow. My brain is a finely tuned machine and years of eating therapy. And I'm like, wow, I still wish it was a little bit different. Why? Right? Like, why can't I just leave her alone and love her as she is? Because that is like swimming upstream in a riptide in our culture. It really is. And, people lose money off of it. Me being okay with myself, I'm out of their cycle, and it's a big deal. And it's a big deal in every single way. I'm right now, I'm on a big thing with coaches, because I think weight loss coaches really It really can be harmful. I've just seen a lot of abuse. Like, do you know what the common denominator of all your diets is? You. So you're the problem. I mean, talk about true actual abuse, which oddly enough, if you think about it more from a business perspective, I mean, you're really keeping this person in your sales cycle for the rest of their life because you're making them believe it's them. And I think there is a piece of this culture that really preys on vulnerability.
So is this why it would almost be a requisite to be involved in some sort of 12-step program, which says you can't really cure the disease, that it's so pervasive that you just get, what's the word that they say that you
recovered?
Well, you're not recovered, but it's held at bay, essentially.
Remission.
Like it's held at bay as long as you keep working the principles. But if you get away from the
remission,
it's so pervasive that you're sucked back into it and you can't get out of it.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip, rapid cheat meal relief. Research shows that cheat meals can actually be an effective way to boost your metabolism. One key weight loss hormone, leptin, can be increased by up to 30% following a cheat meal. The challenge with the cheat meals is that all those extra calories and lower food quality can be hard to digest, which means you could be totally sidelined with a food coma after big cheat meals. The solution is to take strong digestive enzymes like masszymes, which will help rapidly digest and break down the extra food. 3 to 5 capsules before or right after your cheat meal can make a huge difference in how you feel following the cheat meal. If it's a cheat day with multiple large meals, you might want to go up to 10 capsules or higher to help you power through all that food. To save 10% on masszymes, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and enter the code CHEAT10 at checkout.
Well, I think there's listen, I wrote a book called Breaking Up with Sugar years ago, right?
Which, if that was released as a drug today, it'd be classified like cocaine. Sugar would be in the classification of cocaine for its addiction.
And how they make sugar now. Oof. We ain't talking about.
Go to Sidecar
on a little cane,
Krispy Kreme or whatever.
Yeah, we ain't talking. It's like hydrochronic. But what I'm saying in that book is that, we're in 2 relationships no matter what, right? We're in a relationship with ourselves and we're in a relationship with food. We can't outmatch those. And I think to think about, I don't know. Like,
is there a third leg to that, which is it's our relationship to our community that we identify with?
Yeah.
So I think there's a trifecta there. Because
I should go rewrite the book probably.
Yeah. No, it's just because
it's beautiful. Because the studies really say, right, that the opposite of addiction is connection. And as I've been doing this work for so long, it actually is always the missing link for people is connection. And so when you're saying is something that we're missing, the 12-step groups, I'm not sure, like, I don't want to put that kind of pressure on the 12-step groups because they're self-run, but is the missing link, vulnerability and authenticity and and authentic connection with other people, which is, I think, where these tribes come up, right?
Right.
And when I think that this counter culture, this traumatic response to diet culture of this health at any size is a bunch of people being like, I can't talk about this for one more minute. And then taking that to like the infinite power to be like, let's never talk about it again. And if anybody talks about it, they're kicked out of our tribe, which just isn't the answer. Right.
Right. So you become any one of the counterculture movements that move through music or art, but I think literature or university, like there always seems to be it's almost like the Wu Wei inside of each one. There's the masculine inside the feminine and the feminine inside the masculine. And so there's a lot of wisdom inside of that model.
Well, and I think your question is so wise. Like, I think the perspective needs to switch to say, well, I'm in this relationship with food, because the thing is, like, what you're saying about, like, I'm just back from New York City where I used to live. And the amount of the amount of people who are buying, like purchasing without insurance, Wegovy and Ozempic to lose 10 pounds is like really smart people. And there's we don't have outcome studies on these drugs. We don't have anything on these drugs yet. And it really reminded, I mean, to me, it because I'm an addictions person and neediness person, I always see it I'm like, it's like the lengths will go in the quest for thinness overwhelms me. And so, yeah, I think a shift in what we believe about this, which is it's a relationship we have to be in. I mean, and if we want to go back to Freud, like it's a nurturing tool. It's a nourishment tool. I mean, everything I'm saying isn't $1 billion idea. By the way, you can't really sell what I'm saying, right? You can't really, it just can't. It's not marketable, unfortunately.
Well, let's talk, because you just brought up a reminder of how in I think it was the 50s or whatever, there was a widespread usage of amphetamines among housewives and to stay thin and to stay like super mom, like leave it to
Wait, do you remember even in the 90s when people were doing phenamine and then they realized it was and I was just starting in the industry towards the end of that, and people were still, and they had very clear data that it was impacting the heart. I mean, very clear data. And people were still begging for the prescription, despite knowing, I mean, this is in the addiction. This is in the criteria of addiction, right? Use despite negative consequences, like big criteria of addiction. And I think the stuff with Wegovy and Ozempic is worse because it's use despite not knowing what the consequences are, which can't be that good if you're shooting yourself every single day. I do think there's a case to be made. And like, listen, I had bariatric surgery, ate my way through it, whatever. Like that was a desperate move. I had to do it. I would do it over and over again. I didn't have my own help at the time, but people are doing this without even knowing any outcome data. I mean, it's bonkers to me. It really is.
So let's talk about that for a second, because you're basically saying that people are willing to accept unknown consequences,
right,
in order to achieve the desired outcome.
Yeah, in the strive for the perfect body, right?
What allows us to make those decisions?
I think I really do believe like it's inclusiveness. I think what you're saying a little bit about that alpha piece, like, the thin person is at the top of the pile, is more revered, is more respected, right? Like, I think it's just, I think it's richer. I think, the whole, and there's so much data that supports it, right? Like a thin person gets a job 3 times more likely than a heavier person. I mean, there's just so much data.
All beautiful people make more money than other salespeople. There's certain companies that only hire salespeople over a certain height and weight. Right. So, I mean, but again, that's safety. If you want to go down to like Maslow, like that's safety. And so now we're getting into the nervous system, and this is where the drive of this, right? So there's the amygdala response. So the amygdala at the center of our old reptilian brain, and a lot of people look at it from a funny part and realize this is a hyper efficient system that's evolved over millions of years that regulates a lot of our behaviors, and then takes control of our forebrain complex. And so we think that we're thinking through something, but actually the amygdala, and Dr. David Hawkins did some really, he wrote Orthomolecular Psychiatry.
Yeah, David Hawkins. Wow.
And he got into how the relationship between how your nervous system processes information from a higher brain versus a lower brain system. And the amygdala is essentially the evolution from single cell organisms that we need 3 things. We need an outside energy source, which is food of whatever source. For plants, it could be photosynthesis, light. For herbivores, it's plants. For carnivores, it's meat, it's other organisms. So you can go bipedal or quadrupedal organisms. And then we have the desire for safety. In other words, I need defense mechanisms to protect myself. And in the sophisticated human, that's where our socialization kind of emerges. And then we have the ability to replicate, in other words, to extend our genes through time, which is the procreation tendency. These are 3 very strong drives that literally have evolved over millions of years and are all kind of wrapped up in this dietary culture. I need to, number one, be desirable for replication. I need food, but I need to have the food that supports me to look a certain way, that gives me this status, that allows me to replicate my genes. So you see how these are really powerful.
You know, it's also super interesting, although it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, is that I think COVID and culture and isolation culture is going to impact this so profoundly, because 1 out of every 5 men doesn't have one friend. And that's recent data. And 1 out of every 7 women does not have one friend. And people are not marrying with the same, people are not I think there's a very significant number of men at the age of 30 who have not yet had sex. I mean, this is actually like
of men have not had sex in the last year.
It's a huge number, right?
30%, I mean, 30%.
Yeah. I mean, it's just
men
like
who don't have sex, they just really do bad. Like, it's not good.
This is what I'm saying.
Drugs,
like
alcohol.
There's like diet. We have like
violence.
Diet culture, but like this particular, your Stephen Hawking's data is terrifying.
Yeah.
On every level culturally right now, and I do believe wholeheartedly it's about connection. The study with the rats and heroin, right? The rats are
right. They'll abandon heroin for connection of the rat community.
Right. The rats will forego heroin to go play with other rats. If that doesn't say it all, I don't know what does, except for rats don't have a shame response. So rats don't have, and the primary function of shame is to prevent yourself from rejection, right? So you self-reject before you have to go into something. You say, oh, that's not safe. That's going to reject me. I'm not going to go in. So rats don't have a shame response.
But can shame itself be part of an addictive replicate? Like when we get into abuse. So for example, I notice when I've worked with, being in the fitness industry for so long, I would find that many of the people who struggled with addictions around fitness addictions and weight addictions had this kind of spiraling shame connection, that they were shameful if they went off their diet. They were shameful if they weren't in their bikini body. They were shameful if they were 20 pounds over. Like the outcome of all of their decisions ended up in this feeling of shame. And it was like, okay, let's break that. Like I would get them to write about it and explain it. And so there was almost like an addiction to be shamed. Well,
I think shame is incredibly addictive because it's protective. And right? Because
can you expand on that?
Oh, absolutely. All day. I could talk about this literally all day. Well, if you remember, like the primary function of shame is to prevent ourselves from rejection. The worst thing for the brain is the sneak attack. Like the most danger, the brain does not want you happy. It wants you safe. Let's be very clear on that. Okay. So if you're in what you would call like, I mean, this is all trauma. This is all trauma, but brilliant. Shame is an incredibly protective mechanism because it will 100% protect you from a sneak attack. Right.
Okay. So let's talk about the sneak attack because
let's talk about a sneak attack.
So if you go back to The Art of War, which is a really interesting book. I was a student of The Art of War to understand the mechanisms. And one of the
want to know something? It's literally on my list next. So maybe we can have a conversation after I'm done reading.
Brilliant, because it talks about, essentially how you take over a culture. The art of war is to take over your enemy without firing, and to subdue your energy without firing a single shot. Ooh. That's the basic the art. And then to use it, there's subterfuge and to understand, so they don't know what you're doing, and you don't and then the controlling of narratives, and then taking apart authorities, and then masking where you are, and essentially you're creating sneak attacks. So they cannot anticipate your moves. That allows you to be more successful in victory in war. But the sneak attack, and if I think of almost every conversation I've had with someone that's had a traumatic experience, the car came out of nowhere. My wife or my husband just shocked the hell out of me. My business something went crazy.
Right.
It's basically an unanticipated, out of the normal situation that had some sort of impact that threatened your life, threatened your status, threatened your safety.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? What's going on there?
Well, it's a trauma response, right? I mean,
we need to pay attention to this and start looking for it.
Exactly.
Right.
It's so interesting. I was just thinking as we were talking about this fourth trauma response that they're bouncing around. So there's like the fight trauma response that we know all too well. There's the flight one that we know all too well. There's the freeze one.
Yep.
And we know pretty well. And there's this other one they're talking about, which is a fawn response. Have you heard of this one?
I just heard about this the other day. Could expand on it.
Yeah, it's like when you sort of please the person, where, you know, in order to remain safe, you sort of yes them and you sort of take care of them and you say, oh my gosh, yeah, totally. Yes, we'll do that. No problem. Yes. Right. And I'm thinking about that as you're explaining when I'm still in the gym with the bikini body, right? When it's like, well, I understand why people sabotage is a function of fear also, right? We're scared to level up in that way. And I think there's an idea with this toxic shame where exposure is dangerous. Success is dangerous because then you can lose it. And that is a shame response, right? Like,
right.
And like, by the way, like you and I haven't even talked about health.
No, because I think to really get into understanding how we become a victim or perpetrator of a cultural value system, and particularly a toxic system. And we've identified that you've done a lot of work here on talking about the toxic dietary culture.
Right.
I think it's really important for people to understand how their brain works, what makes them attracted to it, and what the patterns are, which we've really gone down the rabbit hole. Not many people.
But I really want to say, Wade, I think one of the things that makes people really attracted to it is trauma.
Okay.
Like, I think this is the thing that, like, when you have someone who has a significant, this is just like therapist hat on, when you have someone who's so vulnerable to these diets and going to all these coaches, and I mean, you got to look at what's happened that's made somebody decide to do all of these incredibly, unthought out methods to try to get to this ideal body, and I don't know, there's something that's very spiritual about it to me, which is that we're trying to solve an internal problem with external ideas and products. I always remember the man I treated a man many years ago, and he said, I just need to have 10 million liquid, then I'll be okay. Once I get 10 million liquid. And I said, you're going to get 10 million liquid and need 20 million liquid, right? Like, and I think that's the same thing with diet culture. Like, there's a line in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, just says, never was there enough of what we thought we wanted. There's a real part of the spiritual piece of addiction that,
what is enough?
That diet, what is enough? Like, that diet culture really keys in on with us, right? And the orthorexia piece, like this new round that's coming in on vegan and non-nature, like all of these little and listen, like some of it's really good, but not all of it, right? Like,
well, this speaks to something that we've been trying to answer as a company for many, many years. And I think we're actually approaching this. So I was on the high performance maximization issue, and I've had tremendous amounts of success in that. And I've been very fortunate. I've been, successful in fitness, successful in business, successful in a bunch of areas. And there's a drive and a culture to kind of rise up the dominance hierarchy and to bolster yourself within that. Whether there's an unconscious and conscious aspect that probably plays to safety and representation. Mm-hmm. And then having pushed that in the fitness industry to its, on the very threshold of the extreme, being a bodybuilding champion, Mr. Universe competitor, then seeing the drug culture that emerged out of that, stepping away from the drug culture, experimenting, went down the raw food world, experiments, all of that, saw the toxic end of the culture, then move through the nutrition stuff and seeing the medical RDA, which the minimal acceptable amounts, and then understanding that the people, many of the advocates on the front end are at the maximal level. The medical industry is on the minimal level. Both are benefiting from the end result of those recommendations. And then Matt and I 20 years ago said, well, what the heck is optimal?
Right.
And that's why we called our company Bioptimizers, is because how do we optimize our biology? What is the Goldilocks? It's just right for me component. In other words, I'm getting all of the benefits of the health that is advocated. I'm not going to the level that detracts from my health. So Peter Attia, for example, who's a wonderful researcher, has identified that for max VO2, oxygen carrying capacity in the body, it's best to hit the top 2.5 percentile of your age category. Beyond that, you're actually doing more damage than you are getting benefit. So he's clearly identified what that optimal range is,
right,
that is reasonably achievable by most people. And I think that's going to emerge in this culture of extremes. Like we're polarized by extremes in order to get attention. But like you talked about the safety, the true safety is understanding what the middle is. But what is the middle?
Well, I also think, I mean, I don't know, as you're talking, I moved to North Carolina a year ago, and I spend a lot of time in the mountains of North Carolina, and I have to get gas a lot on my drive there, you know,
right.
And I see a lot of people who don't give a shit about what we're talking about, you know, like I see a lot of just dying of this thing, and they're not in any tribe. And I think about when and it always sits with me, like, and I go into the gas station and I maybe look for something healthy to eat in there, and there's just not, these food deserts, and it's on such an enormous scale, this thing where there's such dysfunction in the outlying, right? In the bodybuilding and in the orthorexic and in the diet culture and in the juicing culture and in the vegan, like all of it. And then we have like the rest of the culture that's just dying without any information.
Well, this is where I'm
dying, thinking like a pea is a vegetable,
But this is where I'm talking about we kind of backed the truck up a while back, where I said, okay, there's the pharmaceutical industrial complex system, there's the dietary industrial complex system, and then we have the food agro business, which is leveraging. So if you go to Eric Schlosser's book, Fast Food Nation, it's a great book about
Michael Moss too.
Yeah, he talked about in the 1970s, which is where the explosion of obesity happened.
Right.
That there was a bunch of companies down the New Jersey Turnpike that recognized if we could create chemicals the money spent to acquire a customer was really high. So they would develop chemicals that would mimic nutrients inside the body that would cause us to consume more of that product because our brain thought that we were getting more of it. So a good example of that would be acetylsulfame potassium. Okay. So that product, which is a protein, it's kind of amino acid, which tricks the brain into thinking it's getting carbohydrates in the form of some sort of fast acting sugar. But because it actually doesn't deliver those carbohydrates, our consumption of products containing that increases exponentially because it's not a legitimate food source. It's a mimicked food source. Like if I was eating
artificial sweeteners,
if I was eating blueberries, there's a satiety index that hits. And the satiety says, I've eaten enough of this, I can't take any more. That's because we've evolved with biology. But now the chemicalization of society has allowed us to hijack safety mechanisms that nourish us and turn them into that which delivers obesity. Because now, like, a great question, not to attack Lay's, but I bet you can't just eat one. Damn straight that's true, because when I get a bag of Lay's potato chips, I can't eat one. I have this running joke because I love chips. I'm addicted.
Me too.
And it's like, you give me, I don't care how big the bag of chips is. I know all this about diet. I've had all kinds of success on it. I understand all that. You hand a bag of chips to me and I eat one of those chips, I'm gone. And I laugh with my friends because I tell them, I said, look, if you pass the bowl of chips to me or you hand me the bag, you need to do an intervention, because I will literally shut off all awareness and eat the entire bag without stopping. And I will go to the cupboard and see if I can find another one and eat that one too, because there's something that happens.
Well, as funny as that story is, you want to hear something that's really, so actually, like, I don't know if it breaks my heart, but it burns me up. It's in all of this culture, there's a majority of people who don't believe that food is addictive. I'm sorry, like this story, like it is so funny if I wasn't who I was, but like, I'm sitting here listening, like I had the author of Intuitive Eating, Elise Reich, on my show. And I said to her, so, because I just had Michael Moss, who wrote the book Hooked. And Michael Moss said, because he wrote Sugar, Fat, Salt, whatever the book was. And he said, I walked in, I started this book, like I wasn't sure if food was addictive. And I finished this book, like food is definitely addictive, right? Like no questions asked. Like it is literally made for us to want more highly processed food, maybe not oranges. And I had this woman on my show, and this is a bestseller on the bestseller, Intuitive Eating, the book. And I said to her, what do you think about food addiction? She said, food's not addictive. Stop. She said, food's not addictive. There is nothing that your intuition cannot figure out, basically, is what she said. And there's a whole host, I would say largely, every single eating disorder nutritionist, and I would say therapist that I know, and I would say treatment center that I know, does not take into account, and I am not saying everybody's food addicted. That's crazy. Doesn't even take into account what you and I are saying right now when it comes to healing people's relationship with food. They're like, all foods are good foods, everything in moderation. And we're talking about scientifically created food that's literally created to keep you in the cycle. Like you're a business proposition. And so I think when I'm just like a shaman trying to make our way in this world, right? Like I'm just always thinking, like, how do we heal? And when a man like you tells me that story, I think how you and I are like educated. And by the way, me too. You give me Cape Cod potato chips, so I want just one that are folded over. Okay, maybe I'll just have a little. Okay, maybe. And then like there is 3/4 of the bag gone. And I'm like, Molly, you gotta stop here, Yeah. And you and I are educated. I'm a meditator. Correct. I believe food is addictive. I haven't had sugar and flour in 13 years. And I still have a problem if you put Cape Cods in front of me.
Yeah. So I think to summarize for our listeners, because we have a
lot of things to say, listeners. I hope you've taken notes and maybe need to listen to it again. I don't know what to say.
I'm having so much fun with this.
My brain is really working today. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Because essentially what we're saying is, based on the mechanisms of our biology and the way our social structures are set up, it is very easy to become essentially a victim of a dietary cult or tribe that will lead you to an unfulfilling life, in the aspect that it probably be detrimental, not only to your goals, but also to your mental health and probably also to your social standing. Would that be accurate?
I think it is so hard to find a tribe that will really help you heal this thing.
So what's the remedy? Tell us, because we're an hour and 15 minutes into this thing, and we need, give us. Okay,
I'm going to make it like really simple.
I want the antidote.
Really simple.
Give me the shot. Give me the jab. Give me the whatever. Give me the pill.
Make it real. I mean, because that's the problem. I mean, the problem is that the solution is probably not something that you can buy.
Bingo.
And when I don't do anything anymore, right? I'm sober a long time. I don't eat sugar. I don't eat flour. And I had this one woman in the very beginning of when I finally surrendered to healing. And I was a real hard case, because I was a therapist and I was an addictions therapist. And I was like, you don't know. Like, I know, like, please. I was like the queen of I know. And by the way, the more I know, the less I know, but, anyway, what she said was like, when she got sober and she was like me, and she said, I just made a treatment plan I would make for my daughter. And then I did that. And I just think even if you don't have the luxury of the education, like, you have to know somewhere that your kid just eating the Cheetos all day, like, isn't okay. Right. And when we're like sitting here, like, leaving because I think this orthorexia thing is as big of a deal as anything. Like, when we're going to the different supermarket, like searching for like that one, like avocado oil, like, you would never let your kid do that. Right. Or, if you're at home and you're, binging on this and binging, like, and also I need to say the idea that we think of this as what you're saying before, as simply a physical ailment is insane. It is physical, it is emotional, it is cultural with what you're saying. I think it's profoundly spiritual. My definition of spiritual being a shift in what you choose to believe. Like, I think like a lot of diet culture is having your God, the God of your understanding, be a scale. And that's a really crappy God. It's fallible, so I think the answer, if I could give you one thing to do, make your healing plan the one you'd make for the person you love and cherish the most in this world, and know that these quick fixes. I just want to say, I have this woman who I've treated for 6 years, and she was just like quick fix, and she got a terrible diagnosis, and she made this decision, like, I'm going to put the weight aside. And she just lost like 40 pounds in 40 weeks. Because all she did was start to do all the things that she knew were loving and healthy, but not quick, right?
Dr. David Hawkins, in his map of consciousness, which I refer to extensively for those who haven't seen it, he has a beautiful book called Healing and Recovery. And the map essentially delineates the different states of consciousness from which one operates. The scale runs it's a logarithmic scale from 200, from 0 to 1,000. Right. 200 is the line where we go from self-destructive or life detrimental behavior to life-supporting behavior. And then 500 is where the beginning aspect of love and unconditional at 540, and then the levels of enlightenment beginning at 600, the top being Buddha, Jesus, and etc., the avatars. And what's interesting of what you're identifying essentially is that when you move to a position of love, then it seems to be the only way to transcend maybe a behavior or a culture or a culture or behavior that is supported by a culture that may be detrimental, or it's kind of on the negative scale. It's a catabolic effect as opposed to an anabolic in the associated chemical releases. So what you're really saying is love and above is the answer.
I think there is listen, Marsha Linehan, who created dialectical behavioral therapy, Buddha, everybody, right? Everything believes that there is this untapped inner resource inside of us. There's a wisdom inside of us. It's just that there's so much noise and there is such a quick-paced culture that it is very hard to tap into wisdom to know what to do, right?
I see myself actually inside the wisdom.
Yeah. Well, when we're doing our best work, we're all inside the wisdom.
Yeah, it's like there is not an out there. There's like I'm aligning with different aspects of consciousness. So Carl,
except for when you're eating the potato chips.
Correct. I go into some others.
That's what's so. I want everyone to hear this because I actually think that that's true. I think that me too. About 80% of the time, I'm rocking my wise mind, but I can get dysregulated. I can get mindless, lose my best mind, and then I just have to come right back. And that's the other thing that we don't talk enough about is like the idea that like you can be eating a cookie and you can just stop eating the cookie, right? Like everybody's like, well, I ate a cookie, so game on, right? There's this terrible thing we have going on there with that.
Well, Freud also talked about there's a drive to annihilation that we kind of enjoy as well. That it's also one of the attractions to kind of tragic or outrageous. Like, why do people watch the Evel Knievel jumping the cars? Like,
Right.
that's, and you go, and everybody's like kind of enlightened, like, that's crazy, you know, look how.
Well, in brain chemistry, kind of like your dopamine's on fire, right? Like, I mean, it's very attention grabbing. And again, like safety, security, right?
And we do these caloric spike days, for example, so one of the ways that I dealt with dealing with unresolved addictive behavior. So in other words, it was like, I wanted a cookie, or I wanted chips, or I wanted ice cream, or I wanted these things that weren't conducive, is that once we kind of achieved a healthy set point, right? Then we'd say, oh, I'm not going to have it today. I'll have it on Saturday. Saturday is my spike day. And then I would practice. I would eat all these foods in celebration. So I'm not associating a negative behavior with foods that weren't supportive of my diet. Mm-hmm. Because that's the other part that starts to happen, is now a food becomes good, a food becomes bad. Yeah. Chips are bad, broccoli's good. And so these value judgments, and then those judgments now become associated with my self-value.
Well, they become moral, right?
Yeah. Now
people say to me, I was so good. I'm like, you're good every day. I don't participate in this. No, thank you.
And people used to say cheat days.
Oh, can't even.
Like, I don't like the idea.
There's a whole page in my book about this. I'm like, we're trying to get into a healthy relationship with food, and we're using the word cheat.
Yeah.
The other thing about cheat days is it really makes your other food, like the food that loves you back, kind of crappy, you know?
Or that I should, like, it's, you know, like you see the subtle
reward with harm. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, oh, the decadent chocolate kind of whatever, like, you know, like there's
totally
like a seductive energy.
I know.
Things that maybe aren't helpful.
I love what I eat. I don't need a bit of sugar and flour. I love what I eat.
But this is tied up in marketing, and this is
right? Honestly, Michael Moss's book Hooked is sick like this, because you know the thing he talks about that always sits with me. Like, if I think I'm 45, I can think of a Dunkaroo right now, and I like, look at my face. I'm like you know, with the little kangaroo, and you dip it into the little, like, I'm 45 and I'm like a leading food addiction expert. Like, that's something, man, you know, and I haven't had sugar for 13 years. Wow. And you can get my memory and my dopamine, and you could get me so wired up about a Dunkaroo. Isn't that bonkers? The marketing's something else.
Totally. That's really powerful.
You would love that book, by the way.
I'm totally getting there.
You honestly, your brain's going to like just go to the next level after you read that book, Michael Moss Hooked.
So what's the answer? We need to get the antidote here in our.
But I mean, I hate to say it. The antidote is like, we need to slow down, because the way that we access wisdom, and like, I'm a huge proponent of meditation and breath. And I'll just be as like, and people are like, well, what does that have to do with me losing weight? I'm like, everything. You slowing down, finding wisdom, taking breath is what allows for you to make decisions that are in alignment with what you want. Otherwise, you're just going to be like taken up by the diet culture, by the pharmaceutical culture, by the food, by all these cultures that you're talking about. They're just looking for the weak link to take off the sides. It takes a lot of attention. It takes a lot of redirection. We have to think about what we're up against. That's what we're saying in this whole conversation. Yep. If you can accept what we're up against, which is going to a party where everybody's taking Wegovia, and then going down the street and smelling the nuts, and then seeing somebody else talk about, and that you have to sort of like, to thine own self be true. You have to really know that what you're doing is right for you.
Right on.
Right. I have to say no all the time. And I'm like, but I know that that's like really works for me, and I'm thrilled.
The power of no.
But I have a lot of people that support me. That's the other thing I want to say. I really roll, like, I have a power circle of people who support me in my life. And I would probably not be able to do what I do with it for a living without it.
One of the things that you said is the way to overcome addiction is through connection. So 1000%. How does connection help you say no, or helps you move
I
to
think-
life-affirming behaviors as opposed to life-destroying behaviors. I guess that would be.
Well, the other thing I really abide by is like coping ahead is like inoculation. So I do a lot of like inoculation behaviors, right? Like I probably talk to someone I love in the morning, someone in my power circle almost every day. I speak to them throughout the day. People are very current in my life. I make sure what's that?
That says it all. The power circle.
Yeah, but everybody should have a power circle.
Right.
It's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I made a friend this summer. He got right in. I was like, wow, there's like no spots in the power circle. I don't quite know how you did that, but like,
yeah,
welcome.
I have the Jedi Council.
Maybe, yeah, it's true though.
I have a Jedi Council.
And let me tell you something. Every single person in that circle, they're boss, man. They're
yeah,
boss
for
humans.
sure. I'm lost here. Got to go to the Jedi Council.
High level, yeah, but you know, and there's that like, yeah, and so I think and listen, by the way, if you want to go back to our conversation, you know, the hardest way to get a power circle is if you're deep in shame.
Of course.
So if diet culture and learned helplessness has infected you, it's so hard to you'll get a power circle, but of vultures. And that's what coaching culture is, in my opinion. No, there's good coaches, but there's a lot of bad coaches. There's a lot of people looking to corrupt you to get you into their like brand and get you into their sales cycle. So yeah, it's tricky. We could talk about this for 1 year. But I think like there's a wisdom inside that we need to be able to access and I think reinforce. And so there is this part of these mindfulness activities. That's what they do. Long-term meditation. And by the way, there's a lot of data now on sighing being as effective. I also want to say the new data on gut health, which is going outside for 20 minutes, waking up earlier, being in the rhythm of the sun. There's a lot of really great data coming out that can help us to make choices that support us. There's a lot of great things happening in the world right now, and especially in science. You know, I think the data that's coming out on, what's the word? I'm losing my word. Circadian rhythm is incredible. And I think it's like and sleep and blue light.
Yeah. Well,
I think all of those things like really matter.
Yeah. It's our mitochondria and it's
right. And our gut, like if we're eating Lay's all day, you know, our gut, which our third brain can't work. So anyway, I don't know. All I can say is the problem is enormous, but the small steps you can take to start to solve it is also enormous. Truly. You can start anywhere. Start in your gut, start in your power circle, start in your meditation practice, start in cutting out processed foods. Don't matter.
Molly, this is awesome.
I know, obsessed.
We're gonna have to have another call because
count me in.
So much fun.
I know we didn't even scratch the surface.
Where can people find out more about you creating a power circle?
Right.
Getting into connection as opposed to shame and addiction and, you know, living their best life, essentially.
Living your best life. Well, I want to say, if you're listening, I am going to offer you 20% off of my Breaking Up with Sugar course using Wade 20 forever. For the rest of your life, you can have this. Such a good course. And there's a lot about power circle and skills and all this stuff in there and meditation. I'm big into that. I hardly talk about sugar when I talk about Breaking Up with Sugar. Spoiler alert. But you can, mollycarmel.com is the best place to come and hang with me. I'm on socials. I'm on Instagram a lot. I'm on Facebook a lot. And I have this great podcast every week, What You're Craving. And it's that's a great podcast too. We just sort of try to get to the bottom, kind of what we're talking about, get to the bottom of what you're craving. And Wade's going to be on it. So stay tuned for that.
There you have it, folks. Check out Breaking Up with Sugar with Molly Carmel. This has been one of the best conversations I've had in a long time about dietary culture. It's something I'm very passionate about and thought a lot about. And I think that having transcended your own challenges and serving as a voice and a messenger and a researcher and an advocator for a healthier life, you're doing great work. And it's an honor and a delight to have you on the podcast to share kind of the existential aspects of dietary culture and how we can transcend the limitations of the paradigm from which we are in. I'm Wade T. Lightheart. This is the Awesome Health Podcast from Bioptimizers. Thank you for joining. If you liked it, share it, but make sure that you check out Molly's work. I think it is enlightening. Take care.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.